by the people, for the people. Many called him the face of our nation. They said his face represented the ideals of unity, community, and American values, and that protecting him was protecting the ideals that held the country and its laws together like glue. However, after several years of discontent, it felt like the nation was unraveling at the seams. The glue barely held together the state lines that made up our now fragile union. I was a third-generation Scot. The hills of Appalachia were where I was born. In a lumber mill next to the river, I worked. I can still smell the pine shavings and the moisture of the mountain air that draped across the hills like a blanket. The view of the valleys takes my breath away every time I see them in my mind. I felt complete, whole, and one with the world. But that feeling would be ripped away, a distant memory that would feel harder and harder to grasp when I lie awake in my tent during the years of great discontent. I received word by letter one day in the sawmill. A commander was looking for men in their 20s and 30s who could stand guard for the president himself, a Mr. Abraham Lincoln. I didn't know about him. I could barely read. I didn't know how to vote. The cry for help was serious. A great war was taking shape. The future of the nation was at stake. Threats of lawlessness and tyranny took hold of the minds of the people in the South, and they needed liberation from the ideas of subjugation, the kind that allowed slavery, the most depraved form of human subjugation. I did not know what slavery was, and had never heard of it. I didn't know that people could be so cruel and inhumane, to rip babies from their mamas and rape children in their beds under the darkness of night, their voices and rights stripped from them like their dignity and humanity. The stories they told were offensive, but what could I do? I couldn't stop a man from taking a black woman as his wife, only to cast her aside because she was property, not a person. Everyone helps as they see fit, the man with the letter told me. I could stand guard and watch for danger and alert the men in my company. I could protect the mental atmosphere of the president so that he could think about the future of the nation instead of watching behind his back. That's when I left home. My cousins, ma and pa, sisters, brothers, aunts, and uncles. I left the only world I had ever known, the quiet village with dirt paths covered by pines, the forest animals, the bears, deer, ground creatures, the fish, and the birds. My friends and my own desires stayed behind me. This is when I was under the employ of the nation, the people, the endless stream of people. It wasn't long before they gave me a uniform, a gun, and my rations. I had to learn how to manage my world, which was contained on my back. We moved where Lincoln moved. There were dozens of us that kept guard around his tent when he was inside of small wooden buildings and when he went from town to town. He wasn't on the battlefield, but he moved on the battlefield of the mind. Lincoln wasn't a man of war. He was a man of peace. He acted more like a minister, disseminating mental peace to those troubled by the war and the discomforting thoughts of losing their homes, their families, and their lives to occupiers from the South. They wondered what kind of nation and people would we be if the South were to win, but Lincoln wouldn't have that. He implored his disciples to think ahead, when the nation was at quiet and at rest, whole and united under the Constitution. The Constitution was his guide. It was his roadmap into the future, and he held on to that and reminded his constituents that this was the guide out of the cacophony of doubts and distress that filled the nation. Indeed, it was a time of great discontent. Lincoln never lost sight of his goal, and for a frail man he maintained stamina, fueled by his directive to continue on until his job of uniting the nation was complete. His wife wept for him. She worried more for him than he for himself. She wouldn't leave him, and that feeling of union between them was the bedrock that fueled his desire to keep the country together. A scorned wife and a distant husband is what the North and South felt like. A woman who threatened to leave her husband if he didn't accept her demands. It was Lincoln's job to settle a divided house. In came the word of the attacks. Men were dying, battles forged on, land was stolen, people were robbed. The scourges of mental disease took hold in the South, every man for himself. These ideas shook the foundation of the nation's mandate, one for all and all for one. The men in my company taught me the Constitution. They'd heard it so much from Lincoln that they could remember it by heart. They taught me about the separation of powers, the job of Congress, and the supremacy of the people over their government. The South felt threatened by the power of the federal government. They wanted to run their states as they saw fit, but lawlessness and disorder took shape, and those laws, based on self-centered principles of profiteering and imbalances of power between the powers, took hold of the South. As Lincoln saw it, as long as slavery kept fueling the industries of the South, it fueled the barons of the southern borders with endless manpower to keep their strongholds alive. Slaves had no choice, no vote, no freedom. Slaves, as he called it, kept tyrants in power. It was a false power, he reasoned, built on the backs of unwilling men and women who could not call forth their destiny. This goes against the principles of the Constitution where all men are created equal. If the truth is self-evident, we cannot build a nation upon lies. Uncovering the truth is an inherent calling for all of us. During the rain, I stood watch. During the heat, I stood watch. During the cold, I stood watch. There wasn't much to do but to watch and observe, to let my gut do the thinking and my eyes do the watching. I listened to Lincoln's words. He grabbed hold of my soul and I followed him, not just with my feet did I follow him. As the disciples followed Christ, I followed him. I didn't believe what he said because the words came out of his mouth. I felt him as a man, and I watched him live. By his virtue, I followed. I became close to him physically, and I became close to him emotionally. He was my friend, my equal, a partner to all of us who held tight to the notions of our nation. He may have been the president, but he was low in spirit, and that is why we fought with him, not for him. I did not leave his side for years. I ate, slept, and worked alongside Lincoln. It was a privilege and an honor. He had his job, and I had mine. In other words, he thought about what he was supposed to think about, and I thought about what I was supposed to think about. Together, we worked to assure the outcome that would soon be realized. Threats of assassination took wind. Eventually, the concern was not just protecting Lincoln's mental atmosphere. It was to protect his physical space and his body. By the end of the war, Lincoln grew worn. The burdens of the people affected his health. A feeling of hopelessness set in, not because Lincoln was a sad man, but that he felt he could no longer muster the emotional force to keep going. The battle within the mind of any man is sure to wear him down. The battle within the nation wears down everyone fatigued by endless turmoil. I was walking through the forest. The sandy ground shifted beneath my feet. The heat grew uncomfortable. I tugged at my collar as it itched my skin. Lincoln was on the path behind us several miles back. We walked ahead to ensure a peaceful trail. Sometimes I felt like I was walking into a mindless wilderness. I wouldn't see an animal or hear running water for days. Eventually, we settled on a stretch of land where we could see for miles around us, but we were being followed by Confederate soldiers. They were hell-bent on killing the president. Desperate, they set their eyes on the president as the prize to be won. Whoever killed the president, and therefore killed the Union, would be a wealthy man. Bandits disguised as soldiers, having stolen the uniforms of dead soldiers on the battlefield, were murder for hire. They brought with them small cannons and shot them at a distance. Lincoln wasn't with us that day. He had stopped in a nearby town for medical treatment and to visit town government officials. They thought he was in the wagons with us. Their aim was to massacre us all. I focused so long on protecting the president that I failed to protect myself. They shot me in the right abdomen with a searing hot cannonball, 4 inches in size. The heaviness of my coat protected most of me from being blown open, but my flesh was severely burned. My flesh melted beneath the wool of my coat. The anguish of not being able to stop their attack pained my soul. Never had I ever experienced intense feelings of powerlessness. I felt God had all abandoned me and my troop. The bitterness I felt towards the band of assassins filled me with bile. I retched with anger and expelled it as vomit. In a miracle, none of us died. Men were maimed, and we were all wounded, but we escaped with our lives. We sent word of the attack to the president and advised him to stay away and find another discreet path forward. The strongest members of the group carried the gravely injured to the nearby town. Nurses with basic medical skills treated our wounds. Their job was mostly to keep us clean and comfortable and let God do the rest. I rested for days, and yet I still could not walk. The heat of the cannonball warped my flesh. I shook with terror. I could not control my body as my mind relived the attack, and I could not set the images or feelings free. But eventually, something inside of me just let go of all the years of torment, terror, and fright. I couldn't stand guard anymore. I couldn't keep my mind attuned to the impending threats of danger. I had to stop holding on to the past. And in one night, the anguish that I felt left me. The bile, the hatred, and the frustration of the war drained out of me. I was free. It was not long after that the nation followed suit. Nobody wanted to die anymore for land-rich barons. Nobody wanted to die to protect their stretch of land. The generals of the Southern resistance surrendered. The end was in sight. I was no longer called to stand guard. They discharged me from my duties, and Lincoln returned to complete his role. I returned north to rest. There was nothing else that I wanted to do but to rest. I took odd jobs and remained distant for a while. There was nothing I could say about the war. I just didn't want to relive it. I kept largely to myself, and I wandered the forest of my hometown. I hunted and fished and slept under the pines. I no longer felt under attack or under threat of force. Even if I didn't know what my future held, I felt peace again. And then the news came. There was a newspaper that was brought on rail to our town. One of my sisters brought it to me in a hurry. Lincoln was dead, assassinated by a coward, shot in the back of the head. I knew Lincoln. He did not fear death, but he felt the revenge of his Southern adversaries in the back of his mind. Like the end of a bitter play, the scorned wife had her day. She killed her husband, but not his spirit. I wept for days. I grieved the loss of my friend, who I never had the chance to say goodbye. None of my friends or family fully understood my loss, but they tried to understand. They surrounded me in comfort, offering me food and company. I couldn't speak. I couldn't tell the stories of my time with Lincoln and what I had learned until I had met my wife, a fair-skinned, blonde-hair angel who rescued me from the pits of my despair. She moved to our village while I was in the army. Her parents owned the general store in town. I married her wearing my military uniform. It was the finest clothes I owned, and, to my family and hers, distinguished me in honor of having served our visionary leader, Lincoln. I worked between the general store and the sawmill. We had a family and we grew. I built a house by hand and I farmed food in our garden. I served in our chapel as a deacon. My wife's courage and strength to birth several children inspired and empowered me. My family gave me infinite reasons to live. In the back of my mind, I wanted to preserve the values of the Constitution, the Bible of our nation. I remembered Lincoln taught himself the law. I thought if he could do it, so could I. So by day I worked and read the law at night. I served in the courthouse as a bailiff and studied under the judge. After many years, I learned to be a lawyer so that I could keep the peace. It is not the law that keeps the peace. We learned that from the Great Discontent. It is the heart of man that keeps the peace, and the law is a tool by which he can mete out justice. I am merely a steward of this nation, but this nation is not land nor laws. It is the people, black, white, Asian, and native. The people are at the heart of this nation. This nation is made by the people and for the people.